What is capital? Now, capital is a very broad term and can be used to explain a number of concepts. We have human capital, social capital, economic capital, and many more to list down. It basically means resources. However, our area of discussion in this video shall be limited specifically to financial capital. Financial capital is simply the financial resources or assets introduced into a business which helps to carry out various business activities. They may be in the form of cash, machinery, equipment, to name a few. Now, we need to understand here that capital is scarce resource and its supply is limited, and there lies an upward ceiling to the amount of currency notes that our central bank can print. So, at any point of time, there is a finite or a limited amount of resources that is available. Even when the number of resources is very large, it is still limited. Every society at every level make choices as how to use its resources. Families decide whether to spend their money on a new car or a fancy vacation. The state government chooses whether to put the majority of the budget into police and fire protection or into education and hospitality. Countries decide whether to devote more funds on national defense or to protect the environment. In most cases, there just isn't enough money in the budget to do everything. At this point, the financial markets step in to act as an intermediary between the buyers of capital and the sellers of capital. Now, who are the buyers and sellers of capital? Mukesh Ambani, Gautam Adani, Ratan Tata, our government. These big corporates and government are mostly the buyers of capital. They represent those individuals or corporates who need money to carry out their businesses and operations. Whereas banks, big investors like Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, Warren Buffett, and retail investors like you and me, they represent the sellers of capital. The sellers of capital lend this money to the buyers of capital via different financial instruments. Financial instruments now can be broadly classified into equity capital and debt capital. The amount raised by companies through issuing equity shares, where the lender or the seller of capital becomes a part owner of the business, is known as the equity capital. The other form of capital raised is called the debt capital. This is the capital raised by the businesses or governments through borrowed funds or loans. Some form of debt capital include corporate bonds or government bonds, debentures, bank loans, etc. It must be noted that since capital is a scarce commodity, it has a cost. When businesses raise capital through debt, they pay interest on it. This interest amount paid is the cost of capital. In case of equity capital, the cost calculation is little complex process. Theoretically, if I have to explain in a very simple language, the cost of equity is the rate of return the company pays out to its equity shareholders. So by now, you must have understood what does capital actually mean. Hi, now that we have understood what is capital and its importance, the next important concept which goes hand in hand is the concept of risk and return on this capital. I'm sure you must have heard about it whenever you heard about investments. So what is risk and return? It's an important concept in personal finance that talks about the relationship between the risk and returns. Generally, it is said that higher the risk, higher is the possible return. As a consequence, we can say that if someone wants to earn a higher return, they would need to take a higher risk, which means that they would need to be prepared for a possibility of losses also. Well, let me give you an example of this. Generally, stocks are more volatile and therefore they are considered risky. So, an investment in stocks has a potential for higher return. On the other hand, bonds are less volatile and are therefore considered to be less risky. So, investments in bonds has a potential for a lower return. So, the question which may come to your mind is that, is this relationship between risk and return always true? And does a high risk always give the higher return? The answer is no. If a higher risk always give a higher return, then it wouldn't be a risk, right? A higher risk has a higher possible return, which means that the return can be high, but it is not guaranteed. Fixed deposits are one of the safest investments, but the return on these investments is very low, which doesn't even give you an effective hedge against inflation these days. So, depending on how much risk you are willing to take over time, you can decide which instrument will work best for you. Like a 50-year-old man's risk-taking capacity isn't the same with a 20-year-old. So, assess the risk and return thoroughly before investing in any financial instrument.